Welcome to Pop-O-Holics, show about hot takes hotter than hot tasted pancakes. We are your space explorers, seeing what we can find. Today we talk about Close Encounters of the Third Kind. If this is your first time on the show, welcome. So happy you could be here. I'm your host, Christian Katie, and I'm joined as always by...
Words, I can't even say my own fucking name.
And...
Brian Dupree. This is... Wow, okay.
All right, that clip dies this episode. I'm putting my foot down here.
All right, Chris.
You had your fun for two episodes.
Chris, please introduce yourself.
Chris Conking. Words, I can't even say my own fucking name.
Chris, you'll get him next time. If this is your first time to the show, welcome.
I knew it.
So happy to have you. Pop-Holics, we have a ruckus here. We try to talk deeply about films, but also we know how to have a good time. And you've stumbled upon one of our main topic episodes. We have our weekly uploads, which is like our weekly news and what we're watching and playing and listening to. And then we have a theme throughout every month. And this month's theme is springing into summer with Spielberg, or as Chris has posted it everywhere,
springing into Spielberg summer. Which I believe Brian also called it that as well.
No, you probably both did. I came up with it, and I'm pretty sure I said what I said. Synergy. We'll get there, boys. We'll get there. We're so happy you're listening. Please subscribe.
I thought what you said was clunky, so I changed it.
Okay, all right.
McClunky.
McClunky. Listeners, let us know what you think. You can email us at popholics@gmail.com. But we talked Jaws last week. Me and Chris, our old, button heads, the old rivalry was made. We had a poll question about it. It wasn't a perfect blockbuster or a perfect film. We both loved it, so why are we even fighting? Who knows? Why are we fighting? Why should we be scared of, as Reagan called it, the bear in the woods? I think this movie talks about it. That is a very, very deep cut to a presidential ad campaign in the 80s, which none of us were alive for, and I just heard about today on a podcast. Anyway, we'll dive into that later, because it does reinforce some of the thoughts I have about this film. But let's talk about it. We're talking Close Encounters of the Third Kind from 1977. There's no way. Hold on.
What the fuck was that?
There's no way that is the trailer. I gotta find the original trailer. That was probably for the edition that we watched. Original trailer. Let's try it. That is a very new type of. Let's go to the original trailer.
There's a certain strain of bacteria called Lactobacillus Teri that will help you grow bigger balls. There was a study published in 2014 that used male Wistar rats.
What is going on?
My favorite scene.
What is going on?
I swear to God, none of this was intentional. That was an ad before the official trailer I found. This is the official trailer of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, 1977.
Close Encounters of the First Kind. Sighting of an unidentified flying object. Close Encounters of the Second Kind. Physical evidence of a UFO. Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Actual contact. Columbia Pictures, in association with EMI, presents Close Encounters of the Third Kind. The director is Steven Spielberg, whose most recent motion picture, Jaws, is already a legend. The producers are Julia Phillips and Michael Phillips of The Sting and Taxi Driver. Creating special effects is Douglas Trumbull, who in this film goes far beyond his achievements in 2001: A Space Odyssey.
I think that trailer says a lot about how difficult this film was to market for the type of movie that it was. And we're going to dive into all of that. We are going to have a non-spoiler and then spoiler section, because if you're like me, listener, and we'll talk about our history with the movie, I had not seen this movie before. So if this is your first time coming to this film, feel free to stick around. We're not going to spoil any of it. We're just going to have general thoughts and then go into spoilers. But that is from the trailer of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. The original trailer, not the new one that was like, let's sell this bitch 2015 style. No, that's the original trailer.
No narration. Let's go.
Dun, 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 aliens. Close Encounters of the Third Kind was directed by Steven Spielberg, written by Steven Spielberg, with a score by John Williams. The budget of $19.4 million. It grossed $306.1 million. It was a success, coming off the heels of Jaws. Clearly by that trailer, that was like, this film is weird, and it was directed by that guy who directed that shark movie you like so much. It stars some returning talent from Jaws. Richard Dreyfuss as Roy Neary, Francis Truffaut as Claude Lacombe, Teri Garr as Ronnie Neary, Melinda Dillon as Jillian Guiler, Bob Balaban as David Laughlin, and J. Patrick McNamara as Project Leader. Probably cut that last one out. Project Leader. Couldn't have been Ted. Couldn't have named him Ted. Had to be Project Leader. That's a Spielberg script for you. What are we going to be talking about? Our history with Close Encounters, both the movie and in our history of alien interactions, and our overall non-spoiler thoughts. And then we'll dive into themes. How does it compare to Jaws, which is the other Spielberg film we watched, and our final thoughts. So let us delay no further. Brian, when we discussed a Spielberg month, this might have been the inception point. Was like you saying something about Close Encounters, and I said, I've never seen that film. And you said, what?
I made a visual reference because we watched Eraserhead, which came out the same year, and I made kind of a visual reference to this movie and with that in Close Encounters. And I don't want to say what it is because I felt like it was kind of a reveal in the movie, the visual reference that I was making. But yeah, I was kind of Close Encounters is something that I came to much later in life as well. It wasn't a Spielberg movie that I grew up with. E.T. was one of the ones that I saw from a young age and rewatched a bunch of times. But this I came to, I want to say late college or even post-college. So within the last 10 years, I saw this for the first time. And I'd only seen it twice before rewatching it for this viewing. Every time I come back to these sorts of movies, whether it be Jaws or Close Encounters, movies like this that are critically acclaimed, everyone loves them, they're considered to be blockbusters. I don't expect them to be as kind of subversive in some ways, and it always kind of astounds me how Steven Spielberg, especially early in his career, was really just going for it and making these giant movies with big ideas and not holding your hand at all through them, and really just letting the work speak for itself. And I think it largely holds up because of that. So coming back to this time, I actually, two other of my friends hadn't seen this. So I showed this to them as well for the first time, to various levels of enjoyment. I think the effects in this movie are very much of the age they're in, even though I think there's some really good stuff here. But coming back to this, I was again, blown away with it conceptually, and having for the first time dug into some of the background material and how it was made. There's so much to dig into there, and it's really just a beautiful construction of film, and something that I think even if Spielberg doesn't agree with the messages he was trying to get across in the movie anymore, I think it's something that stands the test of time. And today, maybe more than ever, with a lot of the recent disclosure stuff that's happened in the United States since 2017, it really it's insane how a scene in this movie is nearly identical to one of the videos that was disclosed by the U.S. government in 2017 and confirmed within the last couple of years. So the fact that this movie is still speaking to the potential reality of this phenomena, I think speaks for itself. And that's pretty much my history with the movie.
Thanks, Brian. And I really appreciate you coming cosplayed as Richard Dreyfuss's character today.
Oh my God. I can't win tonight. The hits keep on coming. Wow.
Christian, I'm so sorry. I was
saucy
thinking
and spicy role.
I was thinking the exact same thing, to be honest.
All right.
But
all right.
Sorry, Brian.
I mean, I've leaned into it throughout the day with what I was texting you guys all day, so I'll accept it at this point. I am that guy.
No, I think he looks great in this movie. He looks really. I don't know what happened, Brian. I'm concerned for the next 10 years of your life because I've seen post interviews. I'm hoping you retain the prime of Dreyfuss. Dreyfuss seems like a wonderful guy. You look great, Brian. Chris, your thoughts, your history with Close Encounters. This was your first watch as well, right?
Technically, yes. I wanted to clarify some of the statements that I made earlier in the month. Christian and I are kind of coming in on this from the same place, basically. We both haven't seen the movie. However, I've seen the end of this movie many times.
Oh, you classic Christian Jaws experience, right? I'd seen the end of
Yes.
Jaws a lot, and I've never seen.
I've seen the end of this movie many times. Being a film fan, whenever you see like an advertisement for like some of the greatest movies of all time, usually this film is mixed into the edit in some way. So like there are elements of this movie that you will see just through like watching cinema history. Basically, is what I'm trying to say. The score is iconic, so that's nothing new. But yeah, this was my first full watch through of Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Yeah, like I had said before, I never saw this movie, and I think I know why. I feel like the people that saw it, it's a weird film to be like, yeah, let's put this on, because it is such a different film, and it's kind of weird. And we talked about our holes in Spielberg, but it's interesting to compare it to his later alien film, which is World of Worlds, which I saw when I was in high school. And it's really interesting to see the same director of this direct World of Worlds, which seems very like antithetical to what's happening in this film.
Definitely.
And anybody who even enjoyed it, it's just kind of a weird thing to recommend. It's a weird movie, and we'll talk about our overall thoughts, but it's just not a movie that the closest thing I could say that would be analogous to this is Arrival, but even Arrival itself, I think, is saying a very different thing and is very different, but clearly influenced, as you'd see on the special features of the Blu-ray that I bought. I did buy the Ultra 4K 40th edition, which has special features, and Daniel Villeneuve says as much. And J.J. Abrams is also there, agreeing with a lot of my opinions of this movie. And also, I was like, oh, this is where you loved bright lights in the lens of the camera.
The lens flare.
Yeah, that was the one thing.
This was the J.J. Abrams lens flare origin story.
I swear to God, it seemed that way. One note on the format, there was a lot of questions that we had leading up to what this would look like. I am now going to be 3 for 3 on the Blu-rays that I buy for the Spielberg month, which I normally don't buy. I normally buy digital. But for someone like Spielberg, I'll fork out the Blu-ray. And this is available in the 4K Blu-ray. I got the 4K Blu-ray of Jaws, which was a great transfer. And, it's I will say it's if you're looking for what way you're going to watch this, I will say it's a mixed bag. Most of it looks great. It's really where you get the bright lights and special effects that just weren't, they were kind of composited digitally, and you have to copy the film when you do the type of effects they do, because you're using the negatives and so on. I'm not too well versed in it, but you're essentially copying film, which degrades the quality. So some of the shots that have the mixed special effects are the roughest looking shots, but they're not badly composed and they don't look terrible. It's just, I think you can see some of the limitations of that design in the format. But other than that, I think it's plenty worth getting either the Blu-ray or the Ultra for it. I can understand why people have qualms with the transfer, but really the biggest lacking thing is the audio, because it's not mixed with like any kind of Dolby sound, which was kind of the more disappointing thing for me, being more the audio person. That was a little bad, but it's not terrible. It sounds like an old movie, and that's just kind of the limitations of the package that they're offering. But a lot of great special features.
I would say compared to the Jaws transfer, this maybe wasn't given as much love.
I think it would take much more work based on the type of special effects that were done. Jaws is a mechanical shark. There's literally no Star Wars type compositing shots where they had to copy. So I just think it's a larger task for a movie that is, although acclaimed, and obviously they're still releasing it in different formats, so there's a market for it. I don't think it's like a Star Wars where like you could just spend $100 million. I literally think it would cost tens of millions of dollars to do the kind of touch-ups that would be necessary to make it look as clean in 4K as just film. So anyway, that's thoughts on the transfer. But let's move on into our overall thoughts on the movie. Chris, start with you because this was your first time watching it fully. You had seen the ending. So what did you think overall of Close Encounters of the Third Kind?
I think technically this movie's doing a lot of wonderful things. Adapting a script like this to the silver screen is a feat in and of itself. It was very ambitious for Steven Spielberg to try and do this in 1977 when the technology to bring some of these scenes to life wasn't truly there yet. You know, to put it into context, this movie came out the same year Star Wars came out. So they were kind of making these parallel to one another. I think John Williams' score is my favorite thing about this movie. Not only because, like we mentioned last week with Jaws, the score is a character in and of itself. You know, in Jaws' theme embodies the shark, right? And in this movie, they also use the score in a very interesting way, which I really enjoyed. In terms of the practical effects, again, it is amazing that they were even able to make this movie in 1977. And what they were able to bring to screen looks excellent for the time. But when it comes to the story itself, I don't particularly like Roy Neary. I think Richard Dreyfuss is delivering a good performance, but I don't really like his character, and I disagree with a lot of the choices that he makes, but we'll talk about that when we get into spoilers. And I honestly was bored for a lot of it. Like, having seen the ending and knowing where the movie was going, I actually had to watch this movie in 2 sittings. And I don't know if it was because of the mood that I was in at the time. Like, this is definitely a movie I plan on revisiting. I want to revisit it. But at least for this first viewing, I was kind of bored. You know, JJ and Denis Villeneuve talk in the interview that Christian and I were mentioning about how this movie perfectly embodies what it was like to live as a family unit during the 70s, right? And while they speak to that as an element of the film that is a strength, that it kind of perfectly captures this moment in time, I think for someone seeing it for the first time in 2021, even knowing the context of what was going on during that era, I don't think it resonates as well as for those like J.J. Abrams and Denis Villeneuve who saw it when they were younger and who could look at that family and go, that's my family. There's a personal resonance there that I just did not have. And I don't think a lot of viewers who watch it in 2021 for the first time will experience. And maybe that's why I didn't like, or I don't want to say I didn't like. There were elements of the movies that I did like. But maybe that's why I was bored by some of the elements of the film and didn't hold my attention. So while I think it's a great snapshot of the era, I don't have any particular nostalgia for that era. So I don't know. I was a little bit bored.
Okay. All right. Classic Christian 2001: A Space Odyssey. I'm capable of being bored in a really great movie too, Chris. Brian, your thoughts?
Yeah,
First and foremost, Brian's appalled at my opinion.
Not appalled. I mean, it kind of makes sense given that you've seen the end of the movie a bunch of times, because I think, yeah, the show what Spielberg does best, or a lot of what Spielberg does best, is not showing us what we are supposed to be potentially afraid of and allowing our imagination to fill the gap. So if you already know what the thing that we're supposed to be maybe scared of, where the movie goes with that thing, it makes sense that could take you out of it. I think a lot of that stuff really works and shows how something like a Poltergeist and these sorts of horror movies that came afterwards were ridiculously influenced by the styles and the effects that he was using. The practical effects in this movie can't be understated how awesome they are. I think there's some really excellent stuff being done here. I I'll say it again, I think the fact that he takes the phenomena seriously. So anyone who, especially at the time, if you were deeply involved in researching this stuff or into it, it is relatively faithful to the modern phenomena as people describe it. And it has receipts as well. So the title comes from J. Allen Hynek, who worked in Project Blue Book for the government to investigate these potential claims, and eventually had a certain percentage, like I think it was between like 7 to 10% of these sightings that could not be explained. And he ended up quitting his job there to go out and independently research this stuff. Jacques Vallée is another person who's been in and out of working with the government around this stuff, and Francois Truffaut, who, it's just insane that Francois Truffaut, the pioneer of the new wave, is in this movie.
It's crazy.
And he's great in it as well. And he plays this actual, French character who is integrally involved, or he plays a version of this character who's integrally involved in the phenomena to this day. So I just think it's really insane how well it holds up in a lot of ways conceptually with what it's trying to represent about the potential reality of this phenomena. I think what is always really surprising is how tragic this movie is on some level. I think ultimately it's very hopeful in a lot of ways, but I can get why you wouldn't like our main character. I think it's maybe difficult to, even if you are... Well, I guess you weren't enjoying following him around, but I think it's understandable that you wouldn't necessarily agree with all the decisions our main character's making, and that's a difficult thing to do to ask an audience to do.
And do you mind if I touch on that
please.
briefly, Brian? I think I can touch on this before we get to spoilers. You mentioned earlier that Steven Spielberg has even kind of made a 180 with how he feels about Roy Neary, based on him in his 20s.
The example that we know is bullshit in the movie, he says the exact same thing in a later interview, like 30 years later, and it just blew my mind. I was like, okay, this is very strange.
But I agree with what Steven Spielberg is saying about the character, because in my 20s, if I were a decade younger, if I had seen this a decade ago, I think I really would have found a lot to like about Roy Neary, because I would have been a younger man with fewer responsibilities. But in my 30s, I don't feel the same way. And maybe I was wrong. Maybe to be precise about what I'm talking about, we do need to get into spoilers. But I think had I seen this movie while I was in my 20s, I would have felt very differently about the entire plot, to be perfectly honest.
No, and I think that makes sense. It's like you're always going to look at things differently. And I think, well, we won't get into themes, but I think the movie is very much about how people view the world as they age and how things change as you grow up. I think that's definitely something that's there. Last thing I'll say on non-spoiler stuff is the incorporation. You mentioned the music, but the incorporation of the music into the plot and how integral it is just masterful. And I agree. It's unbelievable the way it builds to it. Even if you've seen it, I can't imagine that you wouldn't be kind of swept up in where the music ends up taking you plot-wise.
Oh, absolutely.
And finally, one of the best child performances in cinema. The kid playing Barry, Kerry Guffey. He is so well directed, and I think, I don't know, maybe this was part of the film that you were bored in, Chris, but he was like 3.5 years old at the time, and he absolutely sells everything he needs to in this movie.
And this harkens back to what I was saying last week with how talented Steven Spielberg is when it comes to working with children. He's always he knows exactly what to do behind the scenes to get masterclass performances out of all of his child actors, regardless of how young they are. Like 3 years old, this little boy delivers a wonderful performance.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I had talked about, this is my first time to this film, and I may be jumping the gun here, but this is probably one of my favorite Steven Spielberg movies.
Oh my gosh.
Wow. Whoa.
This is big.
Because I think Spielberg, over his career, refined and then kind of missed the mark on the blockbuster genre, right? because he's just such a, I think this film proves how much of a visual artist he is and knows music and had such a strong, intimate relationship with John Williams and his actors that, and was able to develop those relationships as they went, right? Maybe not as long standing, but able to get those performances out. That he's just he's a man of the format. You see some people like, dare I say, Woody Allen, that guy was a writer. That guy was like a comedian who wrote movies and filmed them. And they're basically stand-up comedy, right? He's not like excelling in the format is his own and his taste is there, but he's a writer.
I'm not going to defend Woody Allen here, but
we're defending the art. We're just talking about the art.
No, I know, but that man.
Sorry,
I'm
so sorry. That was the first.
It's okay. I just want to say, it's like that man for like 20 years made movies that have like 90% on Rotten Tomatoes. I think he does have like a known visual style that people appreciate. I'm not very familiar with it, but I think I don't know. I think that might be an oversimplification, but I do not want to stand up for Woody Allen. I just want to make that very clear.
No, I don't want to oversimplify the fact that it was a cohesive thing that he made, and we're not talking about Woody Allen, but I'll even say some other people that are clearly writers. You hear Kevin Smith is a great example, clearly a writer who shoots with a camera, even more so than Woody Allen. And then some people like Michael Bay, who just know how to move 6,000 people and talk to special effects and get a studio to give him $6 billion to make something. There are these people that have these niches. And Steven Spielberg, in this movie in particular, is proving himself as such a master of just the format of visual and audio entertainment. The script is okay, but the cohesiveness of the visuals and the music are so good in this movie. They are masterful. And that's what pulled me through. Chris, you said you were bored. I was just like, every time there's a light in the distance that comes into focus.
In awe of the production.
Perfectly. Yeah. With the soundtrack and the way the soundtrack ends at the end of this. I mean, it's just like, it takes you on an emotional ride where you could just watch this with the score. Very similar to probably how Brian feels about 2001.
And like I said, just to restate, like, I love all the technical aspects of this film. I just think the narrative is it didn't draw me in.
The narrative for me is interesting. And I think that's partly, again, why it's reinforcing. There is this overwhelmingly large, hopeful message, but also kind of a pessimistic, very relatable human story happening at the heart of it. So it has this overall good message, but our main character is very flawed. And isn't that the view of any good humanist, right? It's a very humanist story. So despite it being about aliens. So I find that, and we'll dive deeper into spoilers about themes and stuff, but I think I said in Jaws' big flaw is that overarching, it's not really cohesive. It's two really great sections that make a great A to B story adventure plot. And this for me is much more of just a visual and auditory like joyride with having a complex main character who's kind of an anti-hero at the end of the day, and not he's an everyman, but he's a flawed everyman. He's an everyman who makes mistakes, but has within him the passion for creativity and discovery, while at the same time having a holistic view of culture that again, we'll get into specifics, but I find really fascinating. And it clearly comes from a really young, talented director who probably wouldn't make the same movie today, but it just captures a really great moment of that director's life and of America at the time and of what the vision of the future could be. And I just found that incredibly special. And I found myself at the beginning being impressed by the visuals, but like the story was dragging ass. So I get the boring because the story itself, the plot is meandering and again, dragging a little bit, but the way it just like kind of comes into full focus halfway through and delivers towards the end in this kind of like, I guess if you're not on board and you've already seen it a bunch, I can see that not hitting as much. But I'm just sitting in awe that this movie with this type of story was even made and was this successful. It's just so it's one of those crazy things where you watch it, you're like, how did this film happen? I think one of the first things I texted at our group chat was like, I don't understand how this movie was made. This doesn't make any sense. It's like Independence Day, I get, and I love Independence Day. But this is like if you took all the things where you're like, this is the reason Independence Day is kick-ass about aliens coming to Earth, and you took all that away and still made a good movie, like that's this movie. And I don't know how you pitch that. It just, Jaws was really successful apparently. And it's a lesson for when you're riding high, go big or go home. Go bold.
Definitely.
For sure.
Where no man has gone before. And I found it on the same level as 2001: A Space Odyssey. And I think part of me prefers, I feel more, and maybe this is a point to my character flaws, I feel more relatable to the main character in this than I did to any character in 2001. And I enjoy the messaging behind this story more. I'm not going to say it's a better movie than 2001, but I certainly preferred it. And it really kind of like, the more it's one of those things. I saw it and I was like, oh, that was really good and crazy. And the more I think about it, the more I'm in love with it and can't wait to watch it again. And very happy that I have it on a wonderful physical format. Physical medium.
So I just want to, before we go to spoilers, say that like this movie was clearly researched. He looked into the phenomena, what was going on at the time. But I got to imagine that for a lot of people who weren't interested in this phenomena, this was one of their first experiences to a story that took these concepts seriously. And in terms of the public perception of what these things look like, without getting into spoilers, just the imagery here, I don't know if I don't think it could be understated how much this has influenced popular opinion on this topic. And I really don't know. And I would like to like read about it, about people's opinions on these things going forward. But for that reason, if nothing else, I really appreciate that. It took itself seriously in a way that you wouldn't always expect this sort of thing to.
Yeah, it kind of went off, not just imagination and stuff. It went off human experience with kind of the... how
do I say this without spoiling anything? A popular visual consensus, I think, is probably the best way to describe some certain elements of this movie.
Right.
Indeed. I will lastly say, I just appreciate I love all the human characters as we get later into this film, and I love the representation of science and the government. I think it works even better the older it gets. It's so beautiful, and we'll talk about it more, but like from a production element standpoint, it's just incredible on so many levels. So having not seen the ending scene a bunch of times, like so much of that last part of the movie is just like, I can understand why there's not a lot of conflict with the characters, but from a just awe-inspiring, which is so much of it, of what's happening is beautiful. And I think it works so good and is such a subversion of what this genre mostly is and what most creators do in this space. So for that, I think it's very special. All right, that'll do it for non-spoilers. Watch the movie. I recommend getting it on a nice physical copy or just catching it. I don't know if it's streaming anywhere, but definitely available.
I don't believe it is. I looked, and I don't think it is streaming anywhere.
And I'm not sure if we said it, but we watched the director's cut.
We did. Yeah.
I watched the special edition.
Get out of here, Christian.
Uh-oh.
Just kidding. I'm kidding. I watched the director's cut. I like triple checked to make sure. I watched the Japanese transition. They added a whole bunch of different scenes.
Oh, nice.
It really worked out. Yeah. The parts with Godzilla,
I bet those were phenomenal.
they were great. Atomic breath. Let's move on into our spoiler opinions on Close Encounters, starting now. The spaceship at the end of the movie does a little Dies Irae, by the way. I don't know if you notice how much John Williams loved Dies Irae, but like when there's some tension building and like you think that the spaceship's mad at humans, it does a little bit of bum 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 bum. It's pretty. I was like, oh no, Doom.
I just thought of
Literally,
Jaws, but yeah.
Yeah, no, they creep into it with kind of the Jaws theme. It's
little Jaws elements.
It's John Williams.
Also, I don't know if you guys picked up on this, but When You Wish Upon a Star was also like mixed into the themes.
Oh,
I don't
really?
know how legal that was.
Honestly,
But
I heard this in one of the documentaries, and I hadn't picked it up until I heard that. But my friend who I watched it with caught it without having been prompted.
Pinocchio is like a huge focal point for Roy Neary in this film. Like his wonder, his childlike wonder surrounding that film, I feel like is partially what drives him forward. Like he's trying to recapture some of that childlike wonder in his experience with these aliens. So it's really an interesting fascination he has with that film and that feeling, you know?
Yeah, and so much of like even the prospects of the aliens are produced by the stars. I mean, there's a lot of great shots in this, but even seeing the stars start to move, it's like I'm like, oh, that's good.
It is cool. It's very cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. So let's jump into themes. Brian, I'm gonna have you start us off. What's this movie about? Is it about fucking up some aliens? Welcome to Earth.
Welcome
now that's
to
what I call a
Earth.
close encounter.
Incredible. I mean, yeah. So in terms of Steven Spielberg himself says he doesn't consider this movie to be science fiction. He considers it to be science speculation. So just in terms of the actuality of the phenomena presented, I think even though, you know, it presents a lot of things happening all at once, you know, for the narrative, which you have to do, I think this largely presents things relatively realistically compared to the actual phenomena of what people experience, you know. The fact that there's a whole different variety of the shapes and sizes of the crafts. We get that immediately from the first time we see any of them up close. They're all very different. They move differently. The fact that they are kind of outside of time from our perspective. We get it's very obliquely done a little bit. It's kind of on the nose, but you kind of have to think a little bit on it. But they tie in actual lost craft from military in like the 50s, the 40s, and like Bermuda Triangle type stuff. And they fit that within this context of, oh, these things have been with these aliens. And we realized that nothing has aged. So it's been like 70 years, or I guess at this point, it's been like 30 years from when these things disappeared. The people haven't aged in all of this. So it gives us this idea without ever having to literally say it, that these things completely experience time totally different than we do.
Yeah.
The fact,
Even with the cloud formations, when they're up in the clouds are moving at such a rapid rate, right? And they're precipitating and developing in a rapid fashion.
yeah, they're
Like, it's
affecting
just-
like the environment for sure around them, and using the clouds to hide, which is something that other movies, and maybe it wasn't the first one to do this, but definitely a very cool idea there. In terms of the communication, I think it's really cool, this idea of I guess they don't say it as mathematics, but music as a form of mathematics being an entry point to language with something that doesn't speak any language that we would identify with. I think there's something fundamentally realistic and practical about that, and the fact that the score completely plays through the entirety of it. It's beautiful, right? Aside from I think him taking these, I think he's basically saying that we live in a very populated universe outside from humans, and not necessarily even extraterrestrial. I think that's something that's really interesting about this movie, is a lot of the characters assume that they're off planet, but it's never explicitly stated that these things aren't just things that live in the same space that we do, and they're just around and we don't see them all the time. So there's some pretty big implications kind of underneath this movie. So moving into how this affects our character, again, it takes itself so seriously. Our character literally has a mental breakdown from the realizations that he's experiencing from having seen this. So I think the movie is on some level about the cost of truth for seeing reality what it is and taking that to its logical conclusion. And a lot of times that means not having a family in historical accounts of people who have strived for the highest levels of truth. So I think there's kind of this level of childhood wonder within this man that can lead him to a form of enlightenment, a next step for him, but at a very significant cost to the people he loves and the people that love him. So it's very tragic in that way, but I think it speaks to the truth of when you see the world for what it is, most people don't. And they aren't going to necessarily be happy with you telling them that it's different. So there's something very real about that stands true to this day, I think. I think that's mainly it, you know, like truth and madness kind of, or like, I not genius and madness necessarily, but that fine line of, I don't know how to say it. There's an element of these characters have been incepted almost. There's an image, there's some telepathic communication going on. So that being an element of it as well, with these potentially nonverbal creatures that are able to communicate with humans and draw them and influence their actions to some degree. There's just so much deep mythological lore that's largely based in what people claim the phenomena is. So I think thematically it all ties into kind of the really big swing that this is taking in addressing the UFO phenomenon.
I appreciate that, Brian. I think that's a good takeaway from the movie. I wish that my takeaway from the film was as positive as yours is, because I really like what you grabbed from it. When I watched this movie, and Christian was actually texting us the other night, and I think he and I got similar takeaways. I'll let him speak for himself. But like, this movie to me is a film about obsession and the lengths. I'm pretty much saying the same thing that you are, which is the lengths an individual is willing to go through to achieve their goals.
This is so funny, Chris, because this is why I just relate to the character more than you do, right? I think this is the fundamental difference.
Maybe. But yeah, it's about obsession and the length an individual is willing to go through to make that obsession, that fixation, a reality. You know, Roy Neary is a man possessed by a specific thing, and he's willing to cast away everything to accomplish his goal. And whether you view that, like you put it, as an individual experiencing truth and seeing something that the rest of society just isn't able to wrap their brains around, and essentially becoming some sort of pariah because they've seen outside the cave. You know, there's no going back into the cave once you've left it. But you know, it's so interesting listening to Denis Villeneuve talk about Roy Neary. I really like his takeaway, because he looks at Roy Neary and he goes, this is a musician, this is an artist, like this is a filmmaker who's obsessed with a concept. And he's going after it. He doesn't care what he has to do, but he wants to achieve that final product. And like I said, had I been a younger man when I saw this movie for the first time with fewer responsibilities, I would have related to that a lot. You know, in my 20s, there's this like passionate, maybe naive view of potential. You know, the potential that's out there in the world for you. But the older you get, the more responsibilities you accrue, and the other people rely on you, right? So when Roy Neary, as like a late 20, 30-something-year-old, abandons his entire family, and I'll say it, his wife is intolerable, and so are his children. So like he doesn't have the best family life. So from that perspective, I can also see, well, yeah, he cares about these people, but they don't really respect him, and he probably wants to get away from them.
Just does, as all the beautiful blondes love him.
Right, of course, yeah, based on what we see in this film. So I can see how he would want to abandon that, you know, like the first chance that he gets. But I can't agree with it. You know, I don't agree with that decision. So yeah, I think it's about obsession and what we're willing to cast off to
stay with your
achieve our goals.
stupid kids and your dumb wife until you die miserable.
Oh,
maybe that's not exactly what I'm saying, but Richard Dreyfuss has described himself, at least at this point in his life, as a bit of a man-child. And that's how he got the role of Roy Neary when he was talking to Steven and helping him craft the story during the creation of Jaws. And based on his actions in the film, I would agree with him. Yeah, this character's a man-child.
See, it's interesting. Steve McQueen was actually the first person that Spielberg wanted for this. And according to Spielberg, Steve McQueen would have done the role, but couldn't cry. Didn't think he could cry on film.
Right.
And they went through a bunch of other people as well, a bunch of giant names, Dustin Hoffman, Pacino, a bunch of people before.
Yeah.
And
This is the second special feature, I watched Steven Spielberg list 8 people before the person he was.
Wild.
And it's so great how callous he is and ultimately just honest. But he's literally like, yeah, Dreyfuss, not even on my radar. No, I asked Steve McQueen. I asked Barry Manilow. I asked Al Pacino. And as soon as he said Al Pacino, I was like, oh, I got an alien up in here. Oh, what's going on in the house?
But I think we should also be clear that the Roy Neary character wasn't always going to be an everyman. He was originally going to be like a soldier type, you know, who experienced these events. So when you look at those other actors, maybe outside of like Dustin Hoffman, you can see how Spielberg was casting for that soldier type character and not necessarily the man-child that we get in the final cut, you know? So, yes, thematically, those were kind of my takeaways. The movie's about obsession. I love, though, that there's this other, more hopeful theme, as Christian was talking about earlier, about communication. And like you said, Brian, how the mathematics of music kind of prove it's a wonderful idea that we're able to communicate with anything, with this music in the movie. And I don't want to take everything away from Christian, so I'm going to let him kind of dive more into that. But yeah, it's a very weird dichotomy in the film where you have this like really depressing theme with Roy Neary from my perspective, and then this also really hopeful message when we get to the tail end of the third act of the film. But Christian, what are your thoughts?
I can totally understand how it's depressing. I was watching the movie, I was halfway through it, and I was like, what a strange movie that this character is so unlikable. And although we experience his close encounter that sparks his madness almost, his passion towards figuring out what's going on, how about the movie, you're like, he's throwing a tree through the goddamn house. That scene is incredible, by the way. It's one of my favorite scenes ever. It's so good. It's so great.
Hard to watch. Because
it is this point where even though we know what he's gone through, we as an audience go like, you're going too far, dude. And it's you have two things happening in parallel. We have the larger picture of the overall Earth encountering and trying to figure out what's going on with aliens and shit. And you have the personal, the very human way that this is connected. And that's why I think this movie works really well. It's because we are down on the ground with a character that's personally been affected by something. And yet the movie's able to balance this greater societal grappling. And it's funny, Brian, you were so focused on aliens and shit. And I get it. The movie's about aliens. It's a lot of cool shots.
The thing is, I know
aliens.
I'm going to be the one who talks about that most. So I decided to lean into it. Yeah.
I love all of it. I love that you're so interested. It's so funny because there's like barely any aliens in this movie. This movie's mostly not about aliens, which is kind of my takeaway. It's like clearly the crescendo and the object of desire and the societal implications all revolve around, obviously, aliens. But the movie itself, I feel, I read less about humans seeing aliens and humans just like understanding things they don't understand in general. And so you have a character that grows up in what we'd consider like red state country, who probably from his day-to-day doesn't think about much more than I've got my wife and we need to get a new couch and all this day-to-day stuff. And he then experiences something that's greater than himself or the thing he grew up in. And he is obsessed with it now. He's obsessed with understanding what it means and where it comes from, what the origins are, what's beckoning him forward. And nobody in his life, which happens to be a family that he's made in this small town, understands what's going on. And to everybody else, he's crazy. But on the greater whole, there is this discovery that we have. And like you had pointed out, Brian, so many times in human mathematics and science and exploration and culture, there are things that we don't understand that we get very excited about, and no one around us really understands where that passion is coming from or understands what we're doing in our day-to-day for us to seek resolution. And what's really cool about the aliens and the way that the culture works around it is that it's very scary. It's mostly scary. It's the bear in the woods. Quick diversion on what
Here we go.
Bear
in the woods.
Here we go.
Ronald Reagan, during his run for presidency, released, and I kid you not, and I kind of want to, I don't know how excited I'm going to be to do this during the edit, but I'll try to find it. Released an ad that was just the following. It was just, there's a bear in the woods. You don't know what it wants, and you don't know where it's at, but don't you want to be stronger than the bear? Be stronger than the bear. And the whole idea behind it, and what you see from Reagan politics and now even Trumpian politics, and again, we're not a political podcast, but we'll just
fear-mongering.
Align with fear-mongering here. Well, yeah, potentially. It's that there's a threat, and we don't know what we don't know. And what we know is we have to kill the thing and be prepared and be scared of the thing and be ready with violence to tackle the thing. And that's what the movie's giving us in anticipation. But what the resolution isn't a fight scene. It's not combat. It's understanding and discovery. And the artist, the explorer, the scientist has the discovery and has the opportunity to discover. And what does he sacrifice? People in his life that are very close to him intimately, in which we as the audience are conflicted with, because we're like, well, you're your father. You're responsible for that. And I get that conflict, Chris. But also, they don't understand the greater purpose of what that person's destiny is, what that person's obsession is. And that happens all the time in life. And I found this film to be like, for a big blockbuster, Spielberg's following this up, to do that, it not have like our hero punches person in the face. We'll be doing plenty of that in Indiana Jones, right? We'll be fighting the Nazis later, right? We'll be fighting the ultimate bad and making it really Star Wars-y, good versus evil in other subsequent films. But this film is even greater than that. And I just did not expect that from someone who's known for the popcorn, draw you to the cinema. Master of his craft, certainly, but certainly making things very easy and comprehensible. This movie's not easy to understand, and I really found it enlightening to be like, wow, that's bold. That, and maybe Spielberg feels differently nowadays and stuff about some of the way he wrote it, but it really feels to me as like a young person who sees destiny on the horizon and people around him who aren't on board. And there's a really point that's, the point where I connected most with our main character, going back to the human element, is when he's crying in the shower. And at this point, even though you saw the encounter, you're like, this person could be mentally ill.
Right.
And he reaches out for help and goes, just hold me. And his wife doesn't even offer him that. And that's when I said, well, his son calls him a crybaby.
A crybaby.
And no one's support. And it's like, that to me in that moment is like, no, the family doesn't want him either, and doesn't even want to help him or understand. And that's not what justifies. It's not easy to understand. There's a moral argument to be made that like, just stick it out. You have this duty, you have this responsibility. I totally understand that. And as an older person, Chris, I understand where you're coming from, but also like, this is the ebb and flow of people's passions and their state of mental health and where they're at in relationships, and it's messy. So I found it less problematic, the leave your family for the future, being that like his family didn't support him, understand what he was going through, or didn't care to understand. There's so many moments I could point out, but I've been rambling for long enough just to say that that's where the human thing connected with me. And then very quickly, the governmental thing, where I thought it was very interesting, is that the government's not perfect, and they were, there was a moment where they're like planning on spraying these innocent people with gas and stuff towards the end.
They tried to,
but like ultimately,
they're not planning. They do it.
They did. Well, they didn't do it effectively on our main characters, but yes, they were spraying people with this gas. It was like awful. But within the bureaucracy are people like Francois Truffaut, which is like the idealism and the not cynical take on quote unquote deep state, big government, right? It's like, yeah, there's this bureaucracy and there's militant forces in it, but there are like people in it that are trying to understand. And that's like the complexity of that situation, which again, I did not expect to be something addressed in this type of movie. So just surprising to me of like, oh, it's auditory, like music and all the things you said and the way it's shot, all that is like firing on all cylinders, and then and then it's not a simple story. It's very complicated. I can't wait to dive back into it and watch it for a second run. I just really love this film. It's quite special.
Those
are all the. Oh, good. I only live to make you happy and make Chris my nemesis.
No, that makes me happy too, man. I love when people are passionate about things, and just because I don't find the same messaging in a product, it doesn't mean I, dislike you for having a different opinion. I'm really glad you enjoyed this movie. I always set out to like everything that I watch. You know, that's my goal is never to be bored by something or to dislike something.
Sorry, Spielberg.
That's miserable.
Didn't make the cut this week. I do want to say, on the governmental side, yeah, I think that is what's interesting about this movie, Christian, is there's a level of nuance there, and it's optimistic, right? I think there's a very optimistic take, even though we see the government and the military actively lie to the public, spray these things, put people in danger to cover up something that people have seen and I have discovered independently, right? I think there's something real about that. One of the best scenes in the movie, I think, is, well, maybe not one of the best scenes, but I think it's very true today still, is the scene where the military comes and shows them the fake photo of the UFO, and everyone's like, oh, that's exactly what I saw. And he said, oh, I took this photo, da-da-da. And having the guy bring up Bigfoot and how easy, it's like, that's all it takes to discount the entirety of what everyone else is saying and what they've seen, is you get one guy to say something ludicrous and then everyone's just a crazy person, right? But yeah, again, because of my interest in this stuff, maybe more so than other people, I tend to think of the movie a little more literally than maybe even Spielberg himself had intended it, right?
Yeah, for sure.
You know, it's interesting. While they were making and cutting the film, during one of the special features that we watched, he even stated, like, he couldn't look up in the sky for the longest period of time without thinking that he saw something.
Oh, yeah.
It really got
Getting
to him,
that mindset,
all the research,
yeah, I'm sure.
and making the movie, yeah.
Absolutely. And I again, to reference back to the stars moving, I mean, I just feel like when you're into it deep, you know, you see anything moving in the night sky, it's like, what is out there? And that's why, to me, the prospect of looking beyond and outside, there's so much that's why I don't tend to focus on the UFO stuff, not to discount those experiences or what there could be. I certainly believe that there is life outside of here. But I think the movie, at the end of the day, ends up being more than about even its subject matter, which I think is a testament to how strong its themes are. Is that to me, the strongest things don't come across as even being about the sci-fi nature of it.
Right.
But I think, to your point, Brian, those things are done so according to experiences that it adds a sense of legitimacy and a sense of grounded experience. I think to that first scene, that the encounter scene, this film has, I would say, 2, maybe 3 key scenes, and that's one of them. The one over his truck, that just like,
dude, I'm so glad you brought this up,
really
because
cool.
the way it looks exactly like the car that's pulled up behind him and then it raises up. I think it's one of my favorite moments in cinema ever. It's just so perfectly effective in that moment of like, oh my God, I thought it was something. It's something else. I still don't really know what it is, but my God, it's perfect.
What's so cool how they shot it too. I mean, they flipped the truck over and kept the cam steady.
That whole
and
thing,
that's
dude.
what gave it the gravity lifting up. And I can
Genius.
say a lot of directors have done these types of shots before, and the whole time I was watching it thinking everything was lifting up, and I was like, what the fuck, how did they, it's such a simple salute, Occam's razor for how they shot it, but just so effective and so good looking, and man, we got 2 great Dick Dreyfuss performances. I think he's great in this film, especially during those moments. So moving off of themes, let's compare this directly to Jaws. Chris, I hand the torch to you.
Brian actually mentioned something earlier, which is a direct comparison, and that is this wonderful art being born out of technical limitations. You know, the whole reason we don't see Jaws for the majority of that, or God, I keep calling him Jaws. The whole reason we don't see the
Jaws.
shark.
The shark, Mr. Jaws.
Yeah,
Jaws
Mr. Jaws.
Esquire.
The whole reason we don't see the shark for the majority of Jaws is because the shark did not work. They couldn't get the practical effect to work the way they wanted to, so they just had to shoot around it. And that goes for the aliens in Close Encounters as well. They couldn't make it so the aliens looked realistic enough to film directly. So all of these encounters had to be shot in a way where we don't see the aliens right away. They have to save that reveal for the end of the film. And what that ends up doing is it ends up making both products stronger pieces of art, because of that challenge. And I really like that about both productions. You know, these wonderful products coming about from technical limitations. And besides that, like we mentioned earlier, John Williams' score in both features played differently into the movies, but they both are characters in and of themselves. The scores play a huge part in the success of these films because they are deeply interwoven into what the films are.
And apparently these alien saucers have French horns lining the entire circumference of them, ready
You
to
would seem
blast
so.
off.
They got orchestras in there.
Yeah.
These are bougie aliens for sure.
Brian, what are your thoughts in comparing this to the last film we talked about, Jaws?
So I think very similarly, it kind of follows this format of being the first half a horror movie, the back half more of an adventure movie. But like you mentioned earlier, I think thematically it carries through a little bit more strongly here. Where in Jaws, the camaraderie is really less built around his family than where we get with the two guys on the boat. I think the family stuff here is really good. Even though it's tragic, I think it speaks to a relationship falling apart. You know, clearly there was stuff here prior to him having this moment. And yeah, it's just...
Technically, both main characters leave their family for the second half of the movie.
But one returns to them.
Nah, one's on his way back, but technically you could say Richard Dreyfuss is on his way back at some point because he's going into a place that knows no time or space. So when he pops out, he'll be ready to come back to his family, and it won't even be a day in their eyes. I don't know.
Well, it'll be a long time in their eyes. They might. His wife will probably be dead when he comes back.
Also, we don't.
Yeah.
We also, Chris, don't know that they made it back to the shoreline.
Yeah, we do. We see it in the credits.
They didn't. I didn't see them walk on land.
Dude, the credits of Jaws show them walking back onto the beach.
I
Go
didn't
back and
finish
watch
the
it.
credits. Oh my goodness, you make it through the credits on
I
all
know.
these
We
movies.
got to start doing it. We're missing out on content apparently.
I knew I should have watched Jaws 4.
If you watch the footage behind the credits rolling, it clearly shows them walking onto the shore.
Okay.
You don't know if a land shark got them.
Jimmy Buffett. So he has a beer called Land Shark. I'm sorry.
He does. Yeah.
Oh, I love that beer.
There you
It's
go.
a great beer. I'm gonna get me one. Hold on.
Christian's going for land sharks for us all. Just getting back to how it compares to Jaws, though, I think it kind of takes the scale up. So similarly, Jaws takes the reality of sharks and creates this bigger narrative of mayor corruption and this particularly giant shark. So this kind of ramps up the scales where it's like taking the reality of the UFO phenomena as it's presented by people and putting a governmental conspiracy around it. So kind of making the stakes bigger. So I think there's kind of a through line there with how he's building these stories, even though he wrote this one and didn't write Jaws. Yeah, I think that's the main stuff for me in terms of comparing them. Obviously, the way he handles horror, you know, it's something about the way he can, I don't know, frame scenes and use practical effects to really make things in your imagination terrifying. It's just, he's one of the greats at it, I think.
That whole kitchen scene is very scary.
Oh my gosh. And it's
when all the appliances are coming to life, or when she's trying to run from the perceived aliens, and the screws are being twisted from the vent. It's a scary
apparently
scene.
that was something they added in later. That was like an insert shot of those screws, and so
Really?
effective. Excellent. Yeah.
Very, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say both films are just a representation of everything that Spielberg does incredibly well. The times you talk about what like you don't see in, you know, the imagination, right? That's been said a billion times. It's very obvious, but I think what is seen is still very important because it's not like he's like showing a blank
Definitely.
screen. Right, and it's the implication of all the danger, and I think both of these films do that extremely well. And point out in Jaws, we get the barrels, we get the shifting of the dock in that one scene with the two, blumbering idiots that are trying to hunt the shark at the beginning. You're just always showing things in motion, and they're framed in such a powerful way. And in this film, count how many times you see lights at a distance where you can't identify what it is, but it's like mechanical. That happens a billion times in this picture. You see it in the opening shot in the desert when the car pulls through the sandstorm. Okay, you see it with the helicopter coming through in a more explicit one. You see it with the alien spacecraft. You see it with the planes and helicopters that are dropping. There's so many, like the whole.
Wait a second, Christian.
Visual.
This. Okay, continue. Sorry. It just comparison to Jaws. When you made the comparison about the lights that become a helicopter that originally like, oh, they're coming back. It's literally the same visual gag as when the kids are faking the beach out with the shark, right?
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah, it's super. It's like when you think about it, you're like, oh, obvious. But so many directors forget this step. And it is what makes Spielberg very special in cinema specifically. Is like he just knows those cues of like, I know, like he knows where the audience is at. He knows the perspective of the viewer so well and knows how to manipulate very effectively what our anticipation, what we're seeing, and what like we're expecting after every single sequence. And that is such a four-dimensional chess. Think ahead of the art because you know what the perspective of the viewer is, and it's just something that you don't get unless you're just like, I don't know, it's just a very special person who really pays attention to this stuff, which Spielberg clearly is. And you can see this throughout his work, but I just think like visually this was made by the same director. Obviously he was, but he just has he has such a confident style that we see over and over again that we're very familiar with. But he's so you're in such good hands with him, and I think both of those are very visible. And although Chris, for instance, you or other viewers may not connect, or watchers may not connect as heartfelt with source material, you can still see the same hands at work, which is pretty crazy, and it's so cool to see the different facets of Spielberg, in the different types of movies.
No, I think this picture is deserving of all the praise that it's gotten over the years.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean, just watch the first scene with the UFOs as they're like going through the toll booth. It's like, if I saw that in a movie tomorrow and it was a new movie, I'd be like, that's one of the coolest shots I've seen in like 5 years.
And see, it's so it's so interesting because we see the ships previously and they look bigger than what would fit through that. But I love that we don't really know how big they are at that point at all, right? They're kind of like morphing. I agree. I think it looks great.
It was. Yeah, it was, and it plays a lot in perspective, right? And you realize it at the end of the film. You're like, oh, some of these ships are just like one-manned.
The little like tiny red dot thing is just like, oh yeah, that's just like a foot by a foot or something.
Yeah, and again, I think it's like very interesting to even like at the end of the film show them as like they're essentially just like children sized, right? Yeah. And they're it's just such a unexpected turn, and it's not that expected turn of the alien parasite inside the alien shield with tentacles and it's ready for combat. It's not that where we're like, oh shit, our hero's gonna have to fuck this alien up. It is very much just this like, oh, they're just like there's this level of innocence, which again I think to the theme of the unknown is like, yeah, sometimes the unknown is like just as scared of you as you are of it, and it's also trying to figure out what the fuck you're saying, and you know what binds us? Fucking music. Music is dope, and it doesn't matter where you're from. If you hear great music, you're like, oh, I can feel a certain way because of that. And that's why I extend a lot of the themes beyond, aliens, because so many of these ways that the movie's talking about communicating mathematics and music are beyond culture. It's a ultimately human thing. So,
exactly.
And Arrival's like, what if the aliens can't hear anything? What if they just draw?
Arrival's really playing a lot of the same stuff. I'd have to get into spoilers to kind of, but it's definitely doing a lot of similar things. But I really appreciated like having taken. I took chorus in middle school. We all had to take a music elective, and I learned the hand signals and I don't think I ever realized that the hand signals were there for deaf people to learn musical scales. And I thought that was kind of awesome because it's like, oh, music, that's for people who can hear. But ultimately, when we realize aside from them playing back and forth, when the alien comes out and does the hand signals, it's like, okay, it's like, even though I don't know how to say, how to phrase it correctly, but I thought it was beautiful that this way for deaf people to hear is the way for aliens to physically, I don't know, it's a bridge for them to communicate with us as well, translating this thing that they enjoy into something else. I'm rambling.
Some form of communication.
Right.
Well, they tie it
However,
back to
whatever
to
the sensory elements may be.
They tie it back to mass because, I mean, essentially music is the distance between pitches, which is ultimately a mathematical equation. And our current, like, what we'd consider like a normal scale in like Western music and not even Western music, but like the tone that we set at, it's arbitrary. It's just like a way that we stay consistent so that if I meet, you know, a bassist from the other side of the world, I can be like, we're playing an E and like we're in the same exact pitch. It's just because we standardized it. But ultimately, music is actually not about an exact measurement. It's just about the exact measurement between.
You're agreeing on a starting point,
notes.
and then you move around.
Well, yeah. Well, that and like music at the end of the day is I could start with like a middle C that's like ha, right? But ultimately ha, like a little flatter than that. As long as I go ha, as long as I go in the same intervals, it still makes sense with music. It doesn't have to be that exact note. It's about the distance between the notes, right? Which is what makes it a very universal thing, and is why if you sing a cappella in the shower, it can still sound good as long as you have the distance between notes. You don't have to start on the true home note. It's just about the mathematics of what is the true distance from one interval to the other. And I nerded out about all that stuff because it's funny because you got the guy who's like actually having to play it, and right, he's speeding it up, and the fucking NASA guy behind him who's like second, third interval, fourth down, now to the fifth, seventh interval up,
Just
and you're
insane.
just like, yeah, I mean, there's no way. Like, I play a lot of music, and I would never like calculate it and like, and now I'm going to the fifth, and now I'm bringing it down, like second octave up.
I love that
third.
moment when they have the computer take over. That's very cool.
Yeah, we're going like, we're just like matching whatever they're doing. And then it becomes like a Beethoven fugue type thing where like you're out of any kind of like key. It's just like it's like just a cacophony of notes happening. Pretty cool. Yeah, and then, in closing on that sequence, it, like Independence Day, which I thought of a lot during this film, because Independence Day is literally just like every beat of this film, take the opposite. The thing with the lights, it's like the same apparatus that they try to communicate before the alien destroys it. Like there's a helicopter that has literally the same like light fixture when it's flashing its lights at like the alien spacecraft. It's almost like a joke
the
of
first
like
thing they send out. I remember this. Yeah.
Yeah, they send out this thing that shoots light patterns because they're like, this is how we'll communicate, and then the alien just blows it up. That's clearly in reference directly to like
Definitely
these
poking
pussies.
fun.
These pussies trying to talk to the fucking aliens. Fucking
Could also be a reference to Indiana Jones just shooting that guy in Raiders. All right. Talk about it next week.
Yeah, but that is again, that is Steven Spielberg, misdirecting the audience in a lot of different ways. But yeah, we should cover Independence Day. I mean, I fucking love that movie. I'm not trying to shit on it. That's my first alien love. It's kicking their asses with some true American balls. Indeed. Any final thoughts on Independence Day?
On Independence Day, we were talking about how the aliens look like children, and I want to mention something that Steven Spielberg mentioned during the making of documentary that we watched.
Steven.
I think is
Obsessed
a little
with
bit
little people and orangutans.
So, okay, now that you bring that up, I have to mention two things. So the first thing I want to mention is that during an interview, he says that his intent was to have different types of aliens because here on planet Earth, we have different types of people. And he wanted to represent a diverse culture within the ecosystem inside the mothership, right? And to that, I say bullshit, because I think he couldn't land on an alien design that worked across all the multiple shots that he wanted to shoot. Because like first we get the very lanky kind of marionette puppet alien come out of the mothership.
Terrifying. Slender Man. Oh my God.
Oh
the way
yeah,
it's
yeah,
crawling.
absolutely.
Ooh.
And then we get the little girls in the alien costumes walking around and interacting with Richard Dreyfuss and guiding him back onto the ship.
So yeah, Christian, to your point,
And then
those are little girls in costumes that play the small aliens.
They are, yeah. And then finally we get the more advanced like animatronic alien that does the hand
I
signals.
think that's puppetry as well.
Right? It is puppetry.
Okay.
I used animatronic incorrectly, but it's more advanced puppetry.
Proto ET
right?
for sure. That thing is wild.
Yes, 100%. Yeah. And sure, he's the creator. He can say whatever he wants. Like maybe that really was his intention.
I'm gonna stand up on.
But
I'm
I
gonna
think
stand up for him here. But go ahead.
that's fine. That's totally fine. But I don't wholly believe that. I think that he may be retroactively trying to cover his tracks with that. And okay, the second point to what Christian said, I was dying when he was describing his like initial plan to get aliens off the ramp of the mothership. In the making of documentary, he's talking about how his plan is to take an orangutan, put a spandex alien suit on it with a head, with a like a plaster head on top of it, and then put the orangutan in roller skates
Right.
because he knows that the orangutan won't go down the ramp on its own. So he essentially has to force it down the ramp. How are you going to force an orangutan down the ramp when it doesn't want to go? Well, you put wheels on its feet because it has no idea what that's like, and then you shove it down. And I posted this on Twitter because I just found the concept so ludicrous. And while he's telling this story, he's like, it all went wrong. And I'm like, no
one
shit,
could have guessed that,
Steven Spielberg. You didn't have anybody in your circle to tell you that it was all going to go wrong the first time you were like, let's get an orangutan.
And
Like,
why would the
literally
aliens? He's
at
talking about
that-
it being like, oh yeah, maybe they would be simian. It's like, oh yeah, the hyper advanced.
To that point,
Okay.
though, E.T.'s physique is based off of simian shapes. So like he's had this concept of a simian extraterrestrial for a really long time. If you and Brian, you're kind of like questioning my
I haven't
my
seen
theory
ET
here,
in a
but
while.
if you
So
look at
you might be right.
If you look at the design of E.T., he has a very stocky build, very long arms that can touch the ground, and then his feet and legs are very short, almost hidden underneath his body. So he has the shape of an orangutan, minus his head, his long neck and kind of cylindrical cranium. But Steven Spielberg's been thinking about this orangutan-esque alien clearly for a while because those elements went into E.T.'s design. So I don't fault him for like liking the idea aesthetically of how an extraterrestrial would look like this, but I think the concept of like practically putting an orangutan in roller skates with an alien outfit is just the most absurd thing I've ever heard in my entire life.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I
yeah,
think
but
it's very
you-
it's very relatable to like him going, we're going to put a tiny person in a smaller cage and then put him in the ocean so it looks like the realistic sharks are 25 feet long. Like Steven Spielberg is an absolute genius, right? Genius filmmaker. But I think there's some concepts that he came up with, at least in his early younger days, that were just like, these are the ramblings of a madman. Like, you have not thought this through at all.
Building the mountain with the shaving cream. Listen, you don't want to see the test footage of the orangutan in spandex with the roller skates because I care about animals. I do to a certain extent, but I gotta see that test footage because that sounds
I want to-
hilarious. I know. Who wouldn't? It's awful. I feel bad
Mickey
for
and
the
I-
orangutan, but it happened. So why don't we have the film?
That's what I'm saying, dude. As he's telling this story, why
You
were
wanna
we
see
not
it.
privy
that
to the
footage was
footage?
immediately burned after that. I'm pretty sure.
Mickey and I were talking about it.
It's
Mickey and I were
orangutan
talking about it
cracked his
earlier
neck.
today, and we both said the same thing. We were like, "This is animal cruelty." Absolutely,
Sure.
And I
100%. But if you shot
I feel
the film,
so bad for the orangutan. It must have been
course.
so scared. I
100%.
hate that about
It's
it.
awful.
But like,
It's
The
terrible.
composition.
You're right.
it must look
but-
ridiculous.
But I want to see it because they did film it and they made it happen.
Yeah,
and so
I
as long
desperately
as
wanna
it was
see it
made,
as well.
no one should do this again. I'm not saying like if someone said I'm going to do this, I'd be like, that's animal cruelty. Don't do it. They already did it, so please let me see.
We're on the same page. I mean, you wouldn't have to do it these days because it could just be CGI.
No.
But like...
No. Humans can't possibly conceive what happens to an orangutan with a mask on and spandex on roller skates down a ramp.
Cartoonishly ridiculous movements.
But
that's
in
all
real
I have
life.
to say. Like, the panic that poor animal must have been
I want to
going
see it
through.
so bad, and I know it would end with me going, oh, terrible. Did you get any more shots?
Was that it?
Was that it?
Can I see it again? Did you try a
absolutely
bigger
ridiculous.
orangutan?
Let's get Bob Saget in here to introduce this clip, and I think that's going to make it a little better for me.
Did you test the orangutan's balance at all? Did you get one that was real balanced?
I doubt that even came into play.
I wanna see one try to catch himself.
Furthest thing from his mind as he's like trying to figure out how to make this a reality.
But what if it was genius? See, we'd all be talking about the genius. If like the final shot was like this beautiful, like
No, let's
you
not.
know, monkeys on ice.
This is a good moment to just say, you know, even people that we consider to be geniuses come up with really stupid ideas, right? Everyone does.
Absolutely.
Everyone does.
Yeah.
Everyone's capable of it. Brian, way to close it out and save me from all my ways that I could have dressed up an orangutan on roller skates and the ways that it could have worked, but never should have. They shouldn't have filmed it. Let's be clear. They shouldn't have filmed it. It's wrong.
Another thing that made me laugh.
We just
is
wanna
he
see
goes-
It's the orangutan cut.
He goes, I knew after 5 minutes it wasn't going to work.
This is it,
And I'm
5
just thinking to
minutes.
myself, I was like, Mr. Spielberg, did it not take like weeks to arrange the orangutan coming to set and like designing the costume for it and finding roller skates that would fit a fucking orangutan? Like, it wasn't a 5-minute ordeal. It was 5 minutes plus weeks
We
of
had
planning.
great camaraderie
So, like,
at the zoo. Everything seemed like it was going well. And, you know, we put the skates on.
day of, they brought me an orangutan. As soon as I came up with the idea,
You know, we
it was
saw
on
the
set.
orangutan. He was playing in a street hockey game. I mean, he had it then, so we thought he was the one. But then he shows up to set.
Some people
you know,
fold under pressure.
I think he was
It's
drinking.
absurd.
I think orangutans have a drinking problem. He couldn't balance on those skates for shit.
God, that poor animal's equilibrium was just like shot,
Well,
pushing it down this ramp. Poor thing. Oh my God.
How many
Anyway.
orangutans? You think it was after 5 minutes I knew it wasn't going to work? Is that because the orangutan cracked its neck and died and was like, well, I guess that's that
Spielberg
idea.
did say that on the way down the ramp, the first thing it did was rip off the alien head and throw it to the side.
Wait. Did he? Did he actually get down the ramp? It was unclear to me. This is atrocious. How the hell is this allowed to happen?
That hurt my throat. I was holding it in so much it hurt my throat.
The way Steven Spielberg recounts the event is the first time they tried to push it down, the orangutan kept grabbing onto the handler's arm because it clearly didn't want to go down the ramp.
God, this poor thing.
But then when they finally... I can't even get through this. When they finally pushed it down the ramp...
I'm so sorry.
Oh,
Poor fucking monkey. Oh, he's like technically an ape. He's technically an ape, right? He's not a monkey. He's an ape.
what? No, he's an ape. He's an ape.
Yeah, he's
so
an
when
ape.
he finally
Got a
gets
bad
going
agent,
down the
whatever
ramp,
he
he's
is.
like... he finally gets going down the ramp. He does have a bad agent. So I got you this job dressed in an alien costume. Do you know how to roller skate? That's the first thing they asked me.
I don't know.
And the orangutan's just like, I know sign language and have gotten most of my gigs sitting in a cage, signing to humans or eating bananas. You
Did
want
they
me to do
make-
what now?
Listen, we're talking all this shit about Steven Spielberg's idea.
Wow.
Didn't they make a whole series of movies about a chimpanzee that could play hockey?
I have no idea.
Yeah, it was called
But that's
called
awful.
MVP, Most Valuable
My
Primate.
God, they did
Oh,
make
no.
that movie.
Oh,
It was
my
like
stomach.
an Air Bud-esque movie. They put him on ice skates. I don't know if they actually put the monkey on ice skates, but
I can't.
I don't know how we go out on that one.
What a good laugh.
But the movie was good.
Yes. Once they overcame some of the worst ideas that they had, the movie was good.
God, I gotta get my hand on that footage. If you
find it, if anyone out there even has it, and please don't go recreating it. Like,
and don't
we
post,
here at
post it
Pop-O-Holics
publicly.
do not condone.
I don't think it's ethical to even post it on YouTube. I don't. But I need to see the footage, so just send
Email it to popaholicscast@gmail.com, please.
What a stupid fucking idea. I thought I found gold when I sent you guys the clip of Spielberg talking about the little people in the cage, and I was like, that doesn't technically work. That's like, I get the perspective thing, but the idea of the orangutan on roller skates going down a ramp in an alien costume is
in the video I sent you guys.
cream of the
I don't
crop.
know.
Let's see what are we covering next? Empire of the Sun? No, Indiana Jones.
Raiders, yeah.
Indiana Jones.
We got
the Raiders of the Lost Ark, yeah.
I mean, the whole idea of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is almost as bad as that idea.
I'm sorry, what? You just mentioned a title that I've never heard of in my entire life.
Speaking of which, Chris, I ordered the Blu-ray set, and
Why did you do that? I told you that it's coming out in 4K in literally weeks.
Because we have to cover the movie, and honestly, who gives a shit? Anyway, so it comes with the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which I didn't see till after I ordered it, because it was like in the ... section, because it was like Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, Last Crusade ...
Oh, and by the way, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull as well.
I get the confirmation. It's like, you're also getting King of the Crystal Skull. And I might see the Amazon guy come through and like be like, no, hold on. And then be like, and then take King of the Crystal Skull and be like, you can take this back. This is yours. I only needed these 3 films. Thank you very much, Mr.
Honestly,
Mailman.
I think that movie's worth it for the scene where
Also, do you have to use the bathroom? That's a reference to Amazon drivers peeing. Cops. Old news.
Dark.
Brian, please.
No, I was just saying Crystal Skull is worth it for the first scene where Harrison Ford survives a giant bomb inside of a refrigerator.
Inside a refrigerator.
Incredible.
That was the
Is
moment
it
in the
good?
theater. That was the moment in the theater where I was like, oh, this isn't going to be as good as the other ones.
This is what we're
But in
in for.
retrospect, it's the most memorable, best scene in the movie,
Probably.
which is what's hilarious about the whole thing. Yeah. Spielberg also had an idea for monkeys in that one. He was like, what if we have, hear me out, I know I've had bad ideas with primates before, but we have a bunch of monkeys, and everybody's like, oh no, Steven, there's 18 pending lawsuits over the orangutan and the outfit.
PETA is really on our ass about you interacting with simians.
And they're CG, and they're swinging through the trees like regular ass fucking monkeys.
Oh, thank God. Okay.
Oh, we can make that happen. They're
But get
CG,
this, I
though.
want Shia LaBeouf to be swinging with them. Oh, Steven, why? Why?
Let's make the human do do monkey things. Then I'm in the right. I've made
We're
up
going to
for
put Shia LaBeouf in roller skates.
We're gonna put Shia LaBeouf in a chimpanzee outfit, and we're gonna make him live with chimpanzees. Eat the flies off their backs. The whole rigmarole.
Oh,
It'll
my
work out
God.
great. Wow, we got off. Close Encounters of the Third Kind is an excellent movie. John Williams score. Incredible. Any other final thoughts on that movie? What a tangent.
We covered it. We
No,
covered it
went
all.
through it, yeah.
Aliens. If you have
Giorgio
any
meme.
feedback on our episode, or if you have that sweet orangutan footage, you email us at popaholicscast@gmail.com. Follow us on all the social media. Links down below in the show notes on your favorite podcast player. Follow us and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite player, and leave us a 5-star review. We really appreciate that. That'll do it for this week's episode. Chris, what do we have coming up next week? We've hinted towards
Well,
it.
yeah, as we just hinted, Christian, we're going to be covering Raiders of the Lost Ark, the first Indiana Jones film. I'm so excited.
I'd be more excited for Raiders of the Lost...
Tying it back to our first episode, if you're looking for giant balls, tune in next week. I don't know if you remember the ad that played at the trailer. This is going to be cut. Leave it in.
I'm more interested in Raiders of the Lost orangutan footage.
There it is.
Perfect.
I don't know why I kept wanting to say tangerine. Orangutan and tangerine in my brain. Very close. Tang. It's Tang.
Here we go.
Hashtag Tang.
We'll see you next week on...